responsible timber construction. We're delighted to have such a broad audience with us, and it's good to see colleagues and registrations from across Europe, UK, two in the US, Canada. You can see a couple from Southeast Asia, and thank you for joining us so late, East Africa and equally in Brazil. This session is being recorded, and we will be making it available afterwards. The chat is disabled, but please do use the Q&A function throughout the session to post any questions, and we'll bring these into the discussion at the end. You will see the option for captions and translations. Please do use that if you would like. We're quite lucky to have a stellar panel of guests and experts with us today. We'll be going through a presentation on the principles and hearing from several endorsers and partners of the project before closing out with a Q&A. The speakers we've got: Paul King, our CEO of Built by Nature, a non-for-profit working to accelerate the timber and bio-based materials transformation for the built environment. Paul's previously been Managing Director of Sustainability and Social Impact at Lendlease Europe and the founding CEO of the UK Green Building Council. Paul has also led major initiatives such as the UK's Zero Carbon Hub and served on boards of both the World Green Building Council and the World GBC Europe Network, and brings deep experience in sustainability, policy, and industry change. Naz Ronaldo is the CEO and ESG lead of the Kenya Green Building Society, where she works to advance sustainable solutions across business, policy, and the built environment. A lawyer by training, she brings expertise at the intersection of law, business, and human rights. Nazra serves as the chair of the Africa Regional Network of the World Green Building Council and is an active voice in shaping policy on affordable housing, ESG disclosure, and the urban agenda, championing the role of women, youth, and communities in driving change. We've got Andrew Waugh, founding director of Waugh Thistleton Architects, a London-based practice, world-renowned for pioneering low-carbon design and timber construction. He is a leading international voice on sustainable architecture, regularly speaking and advising on the urgent need to address change in the climate crisis. And finally, we have Lily Tuttenbaum is the project lead of Bauhaus Earth, where she connects research and demonstration projects to a global network of experts and practitioners. She manages the Transforming Construction for a Sustainable Future initiative and the Principles for Responsible Timber Construction, while also leading on the grant development and partnerships. With a background in political science, she brings experience from legislative work in the US and Germany, as well as the international bioeconomy and policy development. Before I hand over to Paul, today's session is really about the principles and exposing them to a wider audience, hearing perspectives from leaders across policy, practice, and research, and encouraging more organizations to endorse and get involved in scaling timber and bio-based construction. Paul, over to you now.
Okay, there we go. Just trying to turn my camera on. Thank you very much indeed, Harry. Welcome everybody to this webinar. I have to say I'm really excited to be here and to see so many of you here as well. It's fantastic to see so many friends, colleagues, and indeed new friends and colleagues from right around the world. Very, very exciting. And I think there's a real sense of momentum building around the principles that is the main focus of this session. But what I do want to do is just quickly introduce Built by Nature. Many of you will have already encountered Built by Nature, but others of you may not have done. So I just want to quickly set the context. Next slide, please, Harry. So our vision, we're a philanthropically funded, not-for-profit organization that's completely mission-driven. And our vision is a built environment that works in harmony with nature, quite a long way away from where we stand at the moment. Next slide, please. And our mission is to lead or help lead a global transformation of the built environment by accelerating the responsible use of timber and other bio-based materials for the benefit of the climate, nature, and people. And something I just want to emphasize there is that Built by Nature exists to help support this movement. This is not about this being a Built by Nature initiative. We exist to help convene experts from across this sector, across the whole bio-based field, right from the forest right through to the building. Our role is not to be the expert, but be the convener of experts and to help give momentum to this movement. And that's why the role that we're playing at the moment around the principles is such a priority for us. Now, of course, the reason for this mission will be well known to many of you. Timber is an extraordinary material. If it didn't exist, we'd have to invent it, frankly, because of what's sometimes referred to as the three S's. Obviously, trees sequester carbon from the atmosphere as they grow and store that carbon into the fiber of the wood they produce. Timber can be used to substitute for more carbon-intensive materials, such as cement and steel, in a growing number of different applications. And of course, if used in the right way, timber can also store carbon for very, very long periods of time. And if we're smart about how we design and use our buildings, that can be a very, very long time. We can be talking centuries. So that's fundamentally why we exist in terms of promoting the use of responsible and sustainable timber and bio-based materials to transform our built environment. Next, please, Harry. So just a quick snapshot. Built by Nature hasn't been around terribly long. The organization was launched by Louders Foundation towards the end of 2021. So we're nearing our 4th birthday. But in that time, we have established 6 European networks. So that's bringing together demand side actors. So this is investors, developers, contractors, insurers, asset owners, and city officials, and understanding from them what they see as some of the biggest barriers that we need to overcome in promoting the use and responsible use of timber. In that time, we have built a network of something over 130 frontrunners. So that's leading companies from across those different disciplines in the built environment. And we've also had the benefit, thanks to our donors, of being able to co-fund projects supporting the development of research and solutions to overcome barriers. So to date, as you can see, we've leveraged over 14 million euros worth of funding for these projects. And indeed, the current count is 57 projects that have either been completed or are currently underway. Next, please. This slide doesn't capture all 130, but hopefully it gives you a good flavour of the broad range of frontrunner organisations that we have within these networks, as I say, spanning right across the value chain of the built environment. Next. And as I say, what we're constantly doing is speaking to these stakeholders and asking them, what are they experiencing? What are you experiencing as the biggest obstacles, the biggest barriers to the mainstream use of timber and bio-based materials? And as you can see from this slide, they come in all different forms. Some of these are issues of perception, some are genuine technical barriers, some are a combination of the two. We can be talking about fire safety, we can be talking about moisture and water ingress, we can be talking about policy and regulatory challenges, and we can be thinking about the supply chain. But one of the things that is really important, obviously, when we're in the business as a mission-led organization in really promoting the accelerated use of timber, is that we ensure that that timber really is driving a responsible transformation. That we are doing this, we're growing this demand in a way that mitigates the risk of unintended consequences, which is obviously not what we want to see. And that, of course, brings us on to the principles. Next slide, please, Harry. So this work has built on the work of many, many people, many experts, including many of you on this call today, over a long period of time. But what it's tried to do is bring together all of that knowledge and that expertise to enable us to form a more cohesive movement. We've worked particularly closely with our colleagues at Bauhaus Earth and also the Secretariat of the Forest and Climate Leaders Partnership, which I'm sure is known to many of you, with the common aim of shepherding the principles to this point and to the next stage as we approach COP30 in Brazil. Next, please, Harry. So what are we trying to do with these principles for responsible timber construction? Well, as I say here, what we're trying to do is to build a common language. It's very, very difficult when you're talking about an industry, a sector that is as diverse as this one is, right around the world. But what we found is that actually there are some universally applicable principles that apply everywhere around the world, we believe. And the feeling is that if everybody starts to refer to these and speak a common language, that will help accelerate the cohesiveness of this movement and enable the timber and bio-based materials to compete more on a level playing field with some of their more mainstream competitors in the form of cement and steel in particular. So that's what we're trying to do here, create a platform where we can all speak a common language and promote the use of timber in the right way. Next, please. So what are these principles? Well, I'm sure many of you will have already looked at these. I know some of you, of course, have already endorsed these principles and so have looked at them long and hard. But let me just summarize these five high-level principles. The first is the very first and most responsible thing to do is to ask whether or not you need a new building, particularly if you're thinking about demolishing an existing building. So the first principle really focuses on extending the life of existing buildings, if at all possible. Of course, it won't always be possible, but in some cases, of course, we can retrofit, we can refurbish these buildings, often using timber and bio-based materials, whether structurally or in insulation and so on. We might be able to vertically extend these buildings through optoppen, as our Dutch colleagues like to call it, through vertical extension of these buildings using lightweight materials such as timber. So that's the number one consideration. The second one is the responsibility of accounting for the whole life cycle impacts of a building. Now, obviously, there's a big focus on carbon and being clear and transparent about the carbon footprint of these buildings, both in terms of the way that they perform in terms of fossil carbon in the production of the materials and the transportation to sites, but also looking at the biogenic carbon that timber stores. Both elements are very important when you're talking about timber and bio-based materials, but we think they need to be accounted for separately so that there's clarity and transparency about how we're comparing timber and bio-based with other materials. But we're also thinking here about the broader ecological and environmental impacts of sourcing materials. Obviously, other materials entail mining of minerals, the extraction of sand and so on, which have very, very significant environmental impacts and social impacts for that matter. And so what we want to do again is compare apples with apples when we're looking at the impacts on forests and natural places from which we're harvesting these natural materials alongside other construction materials. The third area of responsibility is around ensuring sustainable forest management. It's pretty obvious to everybody that if we're going to be using timber for our buildings, we need to be very confident that it's coming from sustainably managed forests. And essentially what we've done here with Principle 3 is UN FAO definition of sustainable forest management. Now, many of you will know that a lot of the devil is in the detail, and obviously it's when we get into what are the actual practices on the ground and how do we demonstrate the best possible sustainable forest management that gets us into the nitty-gritty. And we'll come on to a bit more of the detailed application of these principles later. But this is obviously a fundamentally important principle. The fourth one is around maximizing the carbon storage potential of wood. And what we're talking about here really is about circularity in design. We're about minimizing waste of wood. Wood may be plentiful in some parts of the world, but we don't want to be using it wastefully. Therefore, we need to increasingly be thinking about how we're using it in buildings that it is designed for disassembly, so that these materials, which often have a structural life long beyond the life of an individual building, can be used again and again before they are then eventually cascaded with timber being recycled from structural elements into elements of particle board, fiber board, and other uses before they finally reach the end of their useful life. So we're talking here about maximizing carbon storage, maximizing the life of timber in order to get the best possible value from it. And the fifth principle promoting a timber building bioeconomy really addresses the fact that we've got a long way to go to really get this industry onto a level playing field with more traditional building materials that have become mainstream over the last 100 years or so. We really do need to make sure that every project works hard in terms of upskilling and raising awareness across our different trades and our professions, so that we can get timber and bio-based materials onto a level playing field. So what we're looking at is every project playing its part in promoting a timber building bioeconomy. Next, please, Harry. So what we're doing is we're pursuing a number of different strands to promote the principles over the coming months and beyond. You'll hear shortly from Lily, who's going to talk about the guidance report, which is being led by Bauhaus Earth, but bringing together many experts to dive deeper into our understanding and the broad understanding around these different principles, to get a state-of-the-art view, and to think about where we need to go next in terms of our knowledge and understanding. Secondly, our implementation framework is designed as a very practical toolkit, so that people from the industry wanting to apply these principles have a how-to guide, which is designed around where they sit in the value chain. So whether you're an architect, an engineer, a developer, an investor, we can take you through the steps you need to take and the resources you're going to need to embed the principles within your projects. And thirdly, this year, Built by Nature has repositioned its prize, our second global prize, to focus on the principles. Because what we wanted to do here is to show that these principles are not theoretical. These are based in science and they're based in real world practice. Next slide, please, Harry. So this was our esteemed panel, with the exception of myself, of judges this year. As you can see, an interesting group of people, and behind them sat a very expert group of assessors who looked at the almost 400 applications we received from around the world for completed buildings that are predominantly timber and bio-based buildings that all spoke to the principles. So we asked these projects to describe how they demonstrated the principles in action, even though they hadn't been conceived with those principles in mind, how they demonstrated these principles. So as I say, we had almost 400 applications from 39 countries around the world, as you can see here. And very soon we will be unveiling our shortlist of projects, which we'll be doing at the Woodrise conference in Vancouver in just over a week's time. Next slide, please, Harry. Now, all of this, of course, comes against a backdrop of very significant momentum in the global policy space over the last 5 years or so. And I'm not going to read these next couple of slides to you. You can scan them for yourselves. But many of you will know that things started to change with the Glasgow Leaders' Declaration on Forests and Land Use. We started to see governments thinking about forests and climate and the built environment closer together. We saw the launch of the Forest and Climate Leaders Partnership, which explicitly brought the climate and deforestation crisis together to be tackled together at COP27, 32 different countries from around the world, plus the EU. We then saw 29 countries join the Buildings Breakthrough, launched at COP28. And we saw 70 countries sign up to the Déclaration de Chaillot, launched at the Buildings and Climate Global Forum in Paris in spring last year. And of course, we saw very precisely the launch of the Greening Construction with Sustainable Wood initiative, which you can see here on the right. This group of 17 of the FCLP governments coming together, specifically focusing on the sustainable use of wood in construction and committing to introduce policies and incentives and to remove barriers for that use. Next slide, please, Harry. So we move on from there. Discussions carried on at COP last year in Azerbaijan. And critically, we also saw there the launch of the ICBC, the Intergovernmental Council on Buildings and Construction. And what I really want to emphasize here is that the principles are not sort of happening on their own, remote from these initiatives. We're working very closely. We're in close discussions with the ICBC, obviously already with the FCLP, too many acronyms here. And of course, we're also working very closely with other UN agencies in the form of UN Global ABC, the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction, and also the UN FAO, obviously the lead body on forest and agriculture. So we are working very hard to align with these organizations and the existing initiatives. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We think these principles complement all of these other initiatives extremely well. So we're working together in terms of our planning and our submission of event proposals and other activities for COP this year. And we're getting some very encouraging feedback. We've got already support from the high-level champions for COP30 in Brazil, where we're hoping to see recognition of the principles among the suite of officially recognized initiatives that will be highlighted this year. Timber's role in tackling climate and the deforestation crisis is not automatic. It's not going to happen as a matter of course. There are many other priorities, obviously, on people's agenda as we approach these key decision-making points. But if we can demonstrate that there's a genuinely global movement that spans across sectors, from the private sector to the third sector with leading NGOs and across the public sector, I think we can demonstrate that this really is a critical part of the solution that we need to pursue. Next slide, please, Harry. So I'm just going to wrap up by highlighting really what we're looking for from today. Hopefully you will have all seen already, we announced at the beginning of the week over 200 organizations that have already endorsed the principles. Really exciting, a fantastic range of organizations, many of them companies, leading companies in this space, including frontrunners from within Built by Nature networks, but many beyond that as well. Many leading and highly credible NGOs working in the space, which is really important as critical friends to make sure that these principles really mean what they say. I'm delighted that two of the largest and best recognized forest certification schemes, both PEFC and FSC, have now formally endorsed the principles. What we're saying is for organizations through endorsing the principles to begin with, what we're saying is that they're demonstrating their support for this initiative, as you can see from 2025. From next year through to 2030, what we'll be looking to do is providing evidence that these organizations are increasingly referring to the principles and using them to inform decisions in projects on the ground, and we'll be tracking and reporting on that progress to show momentum. And from 2030 onwards, we hope that these will be applied consistently across timber building projects everywhere. And what we'll be doing is building awareness amongst investors and key decision makers so that they begin to request and expect alignment with the principles. And here you can just see a handful of those 200 plus organizations that have already signed up to endorse. Next slide, please, Harry. So, as I've already said, I think there are compelling reasons why companies and organizations, both in the private and third sector, there's a strong case for endorsing the principles. Obviously, it's about joining other leaders, showing that leadership. It's about recognizing that by speaking a common language, building this cohesive movement, we're de-risking it at the same time. Really critical that we move from being seen as a fringe part of the construction industry to a mainstream proposition that big institutional investors can have confidence in. So I think de-risking this agenda is absolutely critical. And for those of you obviously getting on and endorsing early, we'll be seeking many, and we will have many opportunities to raise your profile at major events such as COP in November. And next slide, please, Harry. And alongside that, we obviously believe that there is a very strong case for governments and policymakers to endorse this too. As I said, the governments that got behind the FCLP initiative for greening construction with sustainable wood committed that they would introduce policies and incentives and remove barriers to the use of wood in construction. And they also said to enable this, we want to work with non-government actors. Well, that's what this movement represents. This demonstrates the private sector, the third sector, stepping up and saying, we are behind this. You've shown leadership, governments. We're getting behind this. We think there's a very strong case for this. It will attract inward investment for your countries, but the right kind of investment that promotes and supports sustainable forest management and sustainable construction. So what we want to do is to demonstrate as powerful a signal as we can to governments at COP to sign up and endorse these principles so that we can work together with them over the coming years. We're already confident that a number of governments are poised to sign up and endorse, but of course we want to encourage as many as possible. And the ask of them will be all the more powerful if we have many more of your organizations on board demonstrating the level of private and third sector support for the initiative. Thank you very much. I think, Harry, that's probably my last slide. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Paul. It was great. Now we're going to be jumping across to Nasra, and it's really our pleasure, and we're very lucky to have her on the call here, and especially considering her recent endorsement and the organization's endorsement of the principles. Nasra, I'm wondering if you'd be able to give us a bit of your perspective, considering the policy shifts and how the principles could have a role, and the impact in accelerating responsible timber construction in your region and beyond.
Thank you, Harry, and thank you, Paul, as well. Hi, everyone. My name is Nasra, and really I sit at the intersection of both the public and private realm. And that's because I serve both as the CEO of the Kenya Green Building Society and Chair Africa, but I also serve at a subnational level with the government here in Nairobi. And so that gives me a unique vantage point from government. I see how policy and regulation sets really the guardrails. And when green standards are embedded into building codes and strategies, they don't just regulate, they unlock investment, innovation, and accountability. And here in Kenya, I think we've done our best to drive, and demonstrate leadership in that regard. For starters, we're in the process of mainstreaming green standards as we speak, which will then, really create a ripple effect to ensure that the sector itself now starts thinking about green portfolios. Separately, through the Forest and Climate Leaders Partnership, we've also committed to protect and restore our forests. Kenya is also co-leading the global initiative called Building Climate Resilience with the Urban Poor, or for the urban poor, because resilience, in the global south and in Africa in particular, is not abstract. It's a daily reality for millions of people in our cities across the region. And, in part, the reason, Kenya committed to the Buildings Breakthrough Agenda is the fact that we have internalized that the new normal has to be sustainable, inclusive, and resilient. And it is through these efforts that Kenya is, privileged to sit as vice chair in the ICBC, which truly gives us a platform to drive this agenda globally with a Global South lens. But despite these efforts, what needs to emerge and needs to be clear is that policy alone cannot deliver. And that's why the private sector and platforms like the Green Building Councils are essential. Councils bridge ambition and practice, turning commitments into certifications, trainings, and tools, and stakeholder engagement so that we can then create that awareness so that key stakeholders like developers, financiers, and communities can then understand, co-sign up to and co-own, and then join us to act on these solutions together. So on my part, this is truly why I endorsed the principles for responsible timber construction, because ultimately these principles ask us, firstly, to extend the life of existing buildings. In the Global South, this is important because cost is a huge consideration when it comes to, any project we undertake, and I'm sure across the world that's the same. Second, the principles also ask us to measure carbon across the whole life cycle, which is important for us as sustainability practitioners. Third, and for me, very important, is that when we think about the materials we're using, we're thinking about them as aspects that feed into a broader ecosystem. So sourcing timber only from sustainably managed forests is critical, especially where our natural resources and our forests serve as dual assets, both in the concept of the biodiversity that they create for our economy, the wildlife, the tourism, but separately also how they serve sectors like, construction, manufacturing, and many more. And because of this, and because the principles also embed the concept of reuse and circularity, so that ultimately what we're trying to do is, yes, preserve, but also create a timber bioeconomy that creates, jobs and skills, it was a no-brainer for me to support the principles. And if I were to narrow down in particular from a Global South context, for the Global South, the principles are not just theoretical, in my view. Africa is urbanizing faster than anywhere else in the world. And so the demand for housing and infrastructure is immense. And at the same time, we can't ignore, as our cities grow, so do the climate risks as well. And responsible timber offers us a pathway to build quickly and affordably while still safeguarding our forests, creating livelihoods, and embedding resilience into our cities. So, my call to you as we're discussing these principles, as we are counting down to COP and beyond, is that let us move from endorsement to action. When it comes to policymakers, integrating these principles into your codes, into procurement, into incentives means you're unlocking not just protection, but prosperity and sanity. For developers and builders, including and piloting these principles into your projects and sharing your lessons openly create a pathway for innovation in a new, sustainable, resilient marketplace, which is itching to unlock investments within the context of sustainability. For financiers, transparency in the context of, the source of wood will be increasingly critical as a source or consideration of capital, especially when reporting includes assessing climate risks as well. And then lastly, of course, to my green building councils, continue convening, training, and certifying so that the ambition is matched with delivery. And truly for all of us in this, session, it's important for us truly to commit today to endorse the principles and align at least one project or policy or convening with them and bring that experience back into the global collaboration. Because ultimately, if we act together, we can flip the narrative. Buildings shift from sources of emissions to storages of carbon, from symbols of depletion into legacies of resilience. And that's the spirit, not just of Kenya's commitment under the various global commitments, but the principles themselves. And it's truly an opportunity for us, for the Global South and beyond, not just to follow, but to shape a sustainable future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nazwa. A very inspiring call there, and there's some terrific precedents and initiatives really coming to play in Kenya, and I'd love to touch a bit on that in following in the Q&A. We're now going to jump across, and I welcome Andrew to join us. And Andrew, I would love for you to talk a little bit about some of the projects and from your position as a key practitioner in the timber sphere, and then really linking that to the designer realm, or the architects and engineers and builders we have on the line here. I think it'd be great to hear your perspective.
That's great. Thanks, Harry. Well, I'm Andrew Waugh from Waugh Thistleton Architects. We're an architecture practice based in London in the UK. And for the last 20 years, we've been increasingly focused on the drawing, the design, and the building of timber buildings. And the reason why we do that, apart from we believe it makes really, truly beautiful buildings, is that because timber construction is a vital component in our journey to reduce the carbon that our industry is responsible for. So as a construction industry, we use an immense amount of energy. The decisions that we make, the buildings that we build, use an incredible amount of carbon and are responsible for a large amount of the greenhouse gases that surround us. So this is an incredibly important part of how we need to develop our industry and how our industry needs to transform. Now, very few countries, very few cities out there have policies in place that promote or legislate for the responsible use of timber. And actually, for many, really for the sustainability of construction. So it's often the responsibility of people involved in the industry to really think about the buildings that they're building and to really come at that from their own personal responsibility or the responsibility of their companies or their individual professions or roles in that industry. So every one of us involved in construction need to understand these guidelines, need to understand how we ensure that the timber that we use as part of this journey towards a low carbon construction, that the timber that we use is sourced responsibly and is used responsibly. And the way in which we do that at Wolf Thistleton at WT is to think very carefully about how much timber we use. So we talk about using wood well. So thinking about the metrics for efficient use of the material and how that informs the design. So we're always trying to use as little timber as we can in each building to achieve the most efficient, sufficient model of construction that we can. And part of that design journey, part of that design ethos has to also be about reuse and adaptability. So looking at timber buildings, and we know that timber buildings are inherently simple to adapt and that the elements that make them can be designed to be easily reused. So this is a way of thinking about design, which is perhaps different to one that we're used to. And we need to account for what we do. So we need to really understand the life cycle assessments, the whole life carbon assessments of the buildings that we design. So how much does your building weigh? What impact of the design decisions that you're making have, and what kind of benchmarks can we begin to establish for different types of buildings? What kind of carbon figures can we really get to know and understand? And then lastly, I'd just say, to everybody involved in the design profession, architects, engineers, contractors, developers, really what we need to understand is the provenance of the building materials that we work with. So we need to know, where these products are from, whether they're timber or otherwise, but especially with timber, where are those products from? We need to understand the forest health. We need to understand how the biodiversity of those forests are working. And we need to understand and to ensure the safeguarding for everyone involved in that industry. So know your materials, know where they're from. And I think that this is an opportunity for a really exciting development in the way in which we think about our buildings, the way in which we think about success in architecture, is to think about more closely, think about the building materials, the processes, the implications of what it is that we're doing. So I really welcome this incredibly important position, these principles, which we certainly will be following to the letter and to the line at Wolf Thistleton. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. And we're very lucky to have Wolf Thistleton as part of the first round of endorsers on that, and to have some great projects that represent these principles in action. We're now going to jump across to Lily at Bauhaus Earth. Bauhaus are a partner of ours in developing these principles, and Lily's got first-hand experience and is looking after the guidance report. Lily, can you give us a bit of a run through from your side and where things stand and how this guidance report is shaping up?
Yeah, thanks so much, Harry. And I'm just going to quickly introduce myself. So Lily Teitelbaum, and project lead from Bauhaus Earth. And In this collaboration, we're working closely with Built by Nature, and Bauhaus Earth is interdisciplinary international think tank. So we're at think and make take. We're looking at applied transformation research to drive systemic change to a regenerative built environment. So in this collaboration, we wanted to look at these principles and see how we could provide more context to each of them in a guidance report. We've already kind of touched on some of the relevance of this because globally we're moving towards an important target, an important action internationally at COP30. So what we're trying to do in this report is really speak at a high level to decision makers there and really break through in the narrative and a global narrative on sustainable construction. We've moved a lot in the past few years, shifting globally our attention from operational to embodied, but there's still so much that needs to be done. And we see this is as a really important opportunity, the different initiatives from FCLP to others to accelerate action in this area and scale up impact, but do it in a responsible manner. So what we're doing with this report is for each of the principles is we want to place them in practice and context. So the report is practice informed. It seeks to be scientifically grounded. So for each of these principles, we want to make sure we're citing kind of what's the latest research in these areas. And also global and readable to global North and South audiences, which is a challenge, I think, to speak to so many different countries. But we don't want to get lost in the weeds, I think, of some of these topics, for instance, on kind of biogenic carbon accountability and such. We want to make it accessible also to countries that are beginning to do work in these areas. So this is kind of the context in which we're hoping to work on this report. And ultimately, we're trying to translate the very purposefully high-level principles into action. So where are key action areas in each of these principles that governments can focus on and scale up on? I think what we really want to demonstrate and what we've been doing so far with the diverse set of authors that we've gathered is to demonstrate that there are strategies out there. There are best practice examples out there. They are not just theories. We want to show what's happening on the ground related to each of these principles, but also honestly bring up and highlight some of the risks and challenges and trade-offs that are there. Some of the obvious challenges that we've mentioned, from overharvesting and premature demolition, all of these things, there's no reason not to touch on them. We all, I think, recognize that we don't want carbon to escape in any of these ways, in any unwanted ways. And so we're all kind of focused on using wood and biomass materials in the most efficient way possible. The premise really for each of the chapters is and what we've asked our authors, we have kind of a range of authors writing a chapter, each of the principal chapters. And what we've asked them is basically what would happen if we did not have this principle? Because I think it's an important starting point to recognize that if we don't have these and we scale up, there will be negative consequences. So we need to realize how important these principles are. So this guidance report has already begun harvesting kind of examples on the ground. So we have, as Paul already mentioned, just run through quickly some of the chapters. So from examples, we had recently some interesting insights in the first principle on extending the life of buildings. I mean, we want to start from the premise of what do we already have. And so one of our authors has looked into examples also in the global south of where this is happening. So global south incrementalism, where, for instance, in Peru, in Lima, where is this happening? We want to locate those areas and demonstrate that it's already interesting practices are taking place. Also, kind of illuminating different tools that are already being used that are quantifying secondary materials, stock quantification of buildings already at the level, and then thinking a next step into policy implications. So what kind of pre-assessment of stored carbon existing buildings needs to be already in place. So these are kind of some of the examples that we're hoping to get at in each of the chapters. So everything from the extending the life, ensuring carbon benefits are really comprehensively accounted in the second principle, understanding where the wood is sourced, so the in-depth understanding of SFM in kind of its regional applicability. And then also to principle 4, unleashing the carbon storage potential of wood. So really thinking about how we can optimize its use as much as possible, and thinking about the policy implications for instance, setting minimum levels of carbon storages, weighing those, and understanding how we can, openly debate those trade-offs. And then lastly, the last principle on promoting a timber building bioeconomy. So thinking about, if we're moving beyond some of these sourcing criteria, certification and such, what else matters? How do we move from fragmentation to coalition building? How do we ensure the entire value chain benefits from these advancements? So we're very excited to see what this diverse group of authors brings out, and how we can actually provide some actionable guidance for governments that are receiving these principles or endorse these principles, so that they can get to work and start scaling up impact in a responsible manner. And just quickly, I think Paul will speak about this, but we're collaborating also with an implementation framework. So we're working on the report as a research institute, but Built by Nature in collaboration also with Rambo is working on a framework to think about, okay, what are the tools there to actually start working, so from the demand side. So I think this is also a very nice example of a collaborative initiative. All right, Harry, back to you.
Thank you, Lily. That was great, and really, really excited to see that report come together. I know there's a lot of hands and typing going away right at this moment, and well done on all of that. I'd welcome our speakers to come on back. Lily, stay on screen. We're going to go to a Q&A, but I might throw one straight to Paul. Can you give us just a bit of insight to the implementation framework, a bit more detail, because I know that the audience would be on the edge of their seat after hearing Lily talk so thoroughly about the guidance report, and what are we expecting come Wood Rise and perhaps the COP?
Absolutely. Just before I do that, I have to say, having listened to Andrew, one of the things, he said reminded me of the fact that sometimes some of us who spend every day working in this space take some of the big picture for granted. And for those people perhaps on this call who are not quite so down in the weeds of this debate on a daily basis, perhaps it's just worth calling out just how big an issue this is that we're grappling with here. We're talking about the built environment being responsible for 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And we're talking about the fact that it's estimated that by 2050, 50% of those emissions are going to be coming from the materials that we use. And then we look at that in the context of the fact that we're forecasting a doubling of the global footprint, a doubling of the global footprint of our built environment in the next 35 years. So it's very obvious that we cannot afford to carry on building that new built environment, the equivalent of what we've built so far, in the same way as we've done it before. And it's critical that we get that going now. So it's super important that we drill into the research and we understand what the gaps are, and we start tackling where we need to go next, which is what the report really gets into. But it's equally important that we can't wait, right? That we can't hang around for another 5 years before we do anything. And that's where the implementation framework comes in. Also, I just want to plug, and I was reminded again because Lily briefly mentioned Ramble. None of this work to date would be possible without the generous support of our donors. As I say, all of this work is philanthropically funded. So a huge thank you to Laudas Foundation, to IKEA Foundation, and we've also, around this project in particular, we've had very direct support from Hilti Foundation and from Ramble Foundation, who have not only supplied some funding, but also are inputting technical expertise into the development of the implementation framework, which at the moment is being tested with very significant numbers of people from across the industry to make sure it's really going to give people what they want. As I mentioned briefly, the idea is that when that goes live, it will be a free to access online resource that you'll be able to go into and immediately navigate according to where you sit in the value chain. So you'll be led, if you're an architect, through a chain of steps and a chain of resources that are available across all 5 principles. The same if you come from an insurance or a developer or another perspective. So we're really, really excited. It's going to be leading to many resources, guidance tools, case studies, real world examples. And as I say, that is going to be launched in November, around about the time of COP. Just while I'm mentioning dates, I want to give one other plug, which is that we have the Built by Nature annual summit taking place in the UK for the first time this year. I'm delighted to say that a number of people, including many international guests, are coming to that. We're expecting over 300 people from across Europe and indeed internationally to come together. And the main focus will be really celebrating the fantastic projects that have been shortlisted and have won in the Built by Nature prize. And as I say, they're all living examples of the principles in action. So if anybody is interested, you'll find the link to the summit. It's free to attend, and it's always great fun. You'll find the link in the chat and there's still an opportunity to register. But I'll pause there in the interest of time and other questions.
Thank you for that, Paul. I'm going to ask Nazareth, there is some really great initiatives happening, and I think you touched on it at a high level. And for those that aren't privy to the information, there's the rewriting and the establishment of these new green standards, and they're quite impactful. And what is put in place now is going to have significant flow through for the years ahead. And equally important, the roles that Kenya plays with both the FCLP and then with the recently established ICBC. Are you able to touch on, from your perspective, some of the expectations or what you're hoping to see come out of COP30, and from a bio base or from a materials perspective, what do you think can be achieved?
I'd like to say that we've just kickstarted the process of mainstreaming standards. So we really have the opportunity because we have a blank slate to shape the conversation from, a bio-based lens as we're mainstreaming these green standards. And so ahead of COP, what we're hoping to see is that potentially we can formally recognized, have the bio-based components formally recognized within the mainstreaming of green standards, because I think that then means if it's something considered mandatory, then it's not something you have to convince the market to do because it's already provided for. And that means there's an easier time to kind of link opportunities with these standards as well. I think the second aspect I want to highlight is there are a few projects that are being discussed at a national level. And it would be interesting to see, hopefully, if they make it through the line, if there's some announceables to make it COP30. But aside from that, there's also the mapping out of BCRAP. And I see an opportunity for us to also, talk about the materials component as we make our announcements for BCRAP at COP30 as well. And that might be vague for a lot of people right now, because unfortunately I'm not authorized to speak a lot more on things which are in the pipeline. But all this to say, with the mainstreaming of green standards, we move from, aspirational to the action. And I think having COP30 as a platform for either highlighting the action, demonstrating it, or signaling what's coming will be powerful, especially because we recently in Kenya launched Kenya's first home eco loan. So it's taken considerations on energy, water, and materials, and it would be potentially something to explore for the Built by Nature team and the wider FCLP team to see whether the bank can also consider bio-based components into the home eco loan so that it directly links this conversation with finance. And I think once we do that, then that's where the real movement happens alongside the standards. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. That's terrific. And you've got my mind racing there, Nazwa. Thanks for sharing that. I think, well, with the time we've got left, Andrew, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Can you really maybe give a bit of an insight to a recent project or a project you've got on the go at the moment, which is really reflecting some of these principles in action? And don't just say all of them, but can you give us a specific example here of one that really gives the audience members a bit of a feel?
Sure, I can talk about a couple. I mean, a built project that we have is the Black and White building, which is an office building in central London, and that building was designed really closely aligned to the principles laid out in the responsible timber construction in terms of the carbon accounting for the building, in terms of looking at the reuse potential of all the different components that went to make that building, and we cataloged those, and then we published the life cycle analysis of that building open source. So that's also a very important part of what we do is to publish open source, and that includes our research. So we're currently working on a research project which Built by Nature are helping us out with, which is called Using Wood Well, where we're looking at how efficiently and effectively we can use timber, monitoring the amount of timber that we use for different types of building, and monitoring the provenance of that material as well. So in both the research work that we do and the built work that we do, we're very closely aligned to the principles.
Definitely. And I think where Lily, I'm sure you'd be able to talk to many examples that would be coming up from the report. And would you be able to give us when can we expect this report, and what are some of the exciting aspects, one or two that you could touch on just before we wrap this webinar up?
Yes, I saw in the comments somebody asked. I failed to mention that the report would be released at COP30. So in November, we will have the report published. I think it would be, what's interesting will also be how all of these principles together can inform policy. I mean, I think it's so important that we've kind of broken them down into something understandable, but you cannot think too much in silos. And I think what we're going to see at the end is some really interesting policy frameworks or suggestions, because at the end of the day, we're speaking to a global audience, and we have to, it has to be coherent for a lot of different contexts. So I think what actually for me will be quite interesting is seeing how each of the policy recommendations or frameworks that come from each principle come together in something meaningful. But I think there's a lot of great examples already being highlighted. It's a work in progress, so there's still work to be done, but we're excited to highlight some things in November.
Thank you, Lily. Paul, I'm going to throw the last moment across to you. Please give us just a final comment. What are we expecting at COP? And then just a final call to action, I think.
Yeah, Harry. Yep, let's stick to time. There's a couple of key milestones coming up. There is Woodrise taking place in Vancouver. We've got a high-level dialogue meeting around the principles. We've got some fantastic representation from around the world there. In parallel, we've got colleagues promoting many of these same messages and these principles at events at New York Climate Week. We'll then be moving to the Built by Nature Summit in October, as I've said, so please do join us if you possibly can, and then on to Brazil and events across Rio, Sao Paulo, and finally at Belém. So right now, the thing I want to emphasize is please endorse the principles. Right now, the most important thing is to send the strongest possible signal we can of the scale and the momentum of this movement. As I said at the beginning, this isn't a Built by Nature project. This is our project as part of this movement. What we're trying to do is create a platform here for everybody who is coming at this from so many different angles with so much expertise, but to give us coherence so that we can be more impactful on a global scale and get these materials into the mainstream palette of developers, builders, designers everywhere. So first step is please endorse, and then we'll get into practical implementation and encouraging governments to follow through with their commitments on policy, regulations, incentives, and removing the barriers. And over time, we will be able to demonstrate the progress that we're making. But number one, please sign up, please endorse, put your name up in lights, along with all the others we already have there. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Nazra. Thank you, Andrew. And thank you, Lily. And thank you all for making the time to join us this afternoon. With that, I'm going to call this webinar to a close. If you have any questions, please reach out to any one of us on the call and the Built by Nature team. The principles@bbn.org is the handle, and we'd be more than happy to go through it at any time. I'm going to draw the webinar to a close now and wish everyone a happy weekend ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.